If someone were to ask you, who is your child? What would you say? And if someone was to ask your child, who are you? What would they say? Not just giving a name, but describing who are you? And what connection does that have to do with the first great commandment? That's what we're going to talk about today. Stay tuned.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
In Dr. Seuss's children's book, Horton Hears a Who, we are introduced to the community of Whoville, a planet that lives on a little tiny speck of a flower that nobody but Horton the elephant can hear. And sometimes it's easy for us to feel like we live in Whoville, not necessarily on a tiny little speck, but we live unobserved. We live in obscurity. We can live as if the rest of the world doesn't really even see us or recognize us or count us as anything of consequence. But fortunately, that is not truth. And we can live aligned with truth, or we can live like we kind of really live in our own little Whoville. We are walking through a series right now on our Thursday episodes of how do we teach our children to make the first great commandment to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, and all our strength, a reality, a truth in our life. And also to understand, why is this important anyway? Not just because it's a commandment, but what's the why behind the commandment even? It's not because God has a giant ego that he needs stroked, and it's not because he is a dictator who is just commanding that everybody serve him and love him only for his own benefit. No. It is for our benefit that we are to love the Lord our God. And when we do that, it positions us to live aligned with how we were designed and created to be. But how do we actually do that in real life? Well, one of those ways is by who we are. Okay, now I get that can sound kind of, okay, what do you really mean by that? So we are going to break that down into something a little bit more tangible today. Last week, we talked about capacity, and today we're talking also about capacity. But last week, we focused on the complicated connection between confidence and capacity, and they are not always connected in the way that we might think they are. And today what we're going to look at is our who capacities. And we're going to begin by looking at chocolate chip cookies. That's right, chocolate chip cookies. If you have never made chocolate chip cookies before, then you need to understand that you make those with ingredients and you assemble all these ingredients together. Flour, sugar, baking soda, it's eggs, all kinds of different things, and of course the chocolate chips. And then you put them all together, you mix them into a nice gooey batter, and you pile them on plates and eat them. Wait, I think, did we skip a step? Okay, well, for some of you, and I might be in that category as well, you actually can just eat the dough, but to make them into real cookies, there is a critical step, and that is they have to be baked. And baking transforms those individual ingredients into an edible cookie. You no longer just have a mix of ingredients, you have a whole new product. And that is what we have to do in order to develop our who capacities. In a similar way, it's like strength training or weightlifting or bodybuilding. What happens in bodybuilding is that as you exert your force against a weight and it strains and stretches and puts tension on your muscle, you want to be able to do enough force that you actually create micro tears in your muscle. Now, you don't want to overdo it because we're not looking for macro tears and we're not looking for legitimate sprains. But what happens is, as the cells come in to repair those tears, they actually overbuild by a tiny amount. And over a period of time, as that repetition continues to happen, that is how muscles get bigger. Yeah, you actually tear muscles to make them bigger. Again, though, you have to time it just right. Just like when you're baking those cookies, you have to get the timing and the temperature just right. Too low of a temperature, and they're going to take forever to bake, and they will never bake correctly. You bake them too short, they're not going to turn out right. Bake them too long, and you are going to have something to throw into the trash. You have to balance all of those things. And in the same way, we can have capacities in our lives. We can see capacities in our children, but it takes work, it takes energy in order to turn those capacities into abilities. Strength training takes work. It's a form of energy that happens at the biological level. Baking cookies also takes energy. I don't just mean the energy of mixing up the dough, but I mean it takes heat, which is a form of energy, in order to transform all those individual ingredients and that goopy batter into an edible end product. And in the same way, for us and our children, there's a certain investment of energy that is going to be required in order to turn capacities into abilities. As parents, it's going to take some energy on our part in order to help our children turn their capacities into abilities. And one of the ways that we can help our children to continue this process throughout their life is to be intentional about how we do this and communicating what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing this with our children. This can begin even when your children are young and maybe they're taking a class. Maybe they're in a gymnastics class or a swim class. And it can be a possibility to just talk to them and say, hey, here's why we're doing this, because we want you to develop the ability to, and you can describe that. You don't need a big, long paragraph. It can be just in a couple of sentences. But rather than just saying, oh, yeah, it'd be cool for you to learn how to swim, it's about letting them know the why behind the action. And eventually, over a period of time, as this just becomes part of the language of your home and of your parenting, it will begin to implant in their minds so that they begin to look for the why behind their own decisions and the activities that they choose to participate in as they get older. This also means, as a parent, requiring our children to put in work when they don't really want to. Yep, that's part of parenting as well. When I bake chocolate chip cookies, I don't mind mixing up all the ingredients, and I definitely don't mind eating them at the end. But you know what's kind of the annoying part for me? It's doing the baking. It's plopping them on those baking sheets and putting them in the oven and setting the timer and making sure that I dash back in there and pull them out when they're ready. That's just kind of the annoying part. But if I want to be able to get to the end product, I have to be willing to put in the work when it's really not fun. Anybody who does strength training knows that there are days that you just don't want to do the work, or you've done your one set and you're like, you know what, I'm just kind of done here. But that's where it's like, no, I have to keep the end goal in mind. And with our kids, there are times that they are going to be enthusiastic and they're going to be all in an activity, whether it's related to their academics or it's related to their relational development or learning their skill sets about how to just manage things that they're going to be expected to take care of in life. And sometimes they're going to be all on board with that. And sometimes you are going to run into resistance and you are going to have to continue to plow ahead because your eyes are focused on what's going to be good for them in the long haul, not just what is easy or what works for you in the short run. And while it can be challenging to do this when it comes to our kids' do capacities, which we're going to be looking at next week, it is even more difficult to do this when it comes to developing their who capacities. And that's what we're talking about today. Who capacities are kind of like a combination of personality and character. Character are the traits that any single person can develop. Personality is a lot more complicated, and we want to be able to look at our children's inborn bents and tendencies and to see where those need to be strengthened and those need to be encouraged. And we don't want to trounce on those just because maybe they have some personality bents that don't align really well with ours, because that's one of the realities of parenting. Sometimes it's easy as a parent that we create these visions in our head for what it's going to be like with a particular child or even a particular gender. And then what do you know? It just turns out that our vision does not align with how our kid is wired. And we have to be mindful as a parent that we don't develop a slow simmering resentment towards that child. Maybe as a mom, you have these visions that if you have a daughter of what that's going to be like. And maybe you're thinking in terms of, oh, that's going to be tea parties when she's younger. And then when she's older, we're going to go shopping together and we're going to go get pedicures together. And maybe your daughter has zero interest in any of that kind of stuff. Maybe she would rather be out climbing trees and riding horses, and instead of going to the shopping mall, she would rather go to the rodeo or whatever. And that's where you have to be careful that you don't try to force your kids into your vision for that relationship or develop or go along with what they want, but at the same time, not really be all in your heart. This is part of our work as a parent, and that is to become our child's student, to pay attention to their bents as they grow up and to see what kinds of things hold true over a period of time. And then to be able to put in the investment of our energy and our time to help nurture those capacities so that they move from capacities into abilities. There's also the character side of it. And this applies to every single person, regardless of personality. Now, how the character actually plays out in specific ways is going to be influenced by personality. That's totally okay. Kindness can look very different between people, but we all tend to recognize kindness and when there's not kindness when we see it, but it doesn't always show up in the same way. But character traits require as much intentionality to develop as our do capacities. One of the best things that you can do as a parent is to write down a specific list of who capacities that you want to develop in each of your children, because all of those capacities don't just develop by default. Any more than if I just wish that I had chocolate chip cookies, I'm not just going to be able to sit in a room and want those badly enough that somehow they are going to magically appear. We can't desire our children's character into being. We can't want it into being. We have to put in the work to help facilitate it coming into being. Certainly, they have their part to play. But the more intentional that we are, the younger that they are, the better of a start that we will give them. Now, if your children are older and you're like, I've just never really been intentional about doing this, don't throw up your hands and say, well, it's way too late. No, just start wherever you are, because when you know better, you do better. And that's true for all of us. If you are looking for a good place to begin by listing who capacities that you want to see turned into abilities, well, a great place to start is Galatians 5:22. And this is the Bible verse that lists the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You can certainly add more specific characteristics to this list as well, but it's a great place to start. And this is where, you can be intentional to say, hey, how is my child developing in the area of kindness? And of course, as parents, that's going to mean that we have to start looking at ourselves and thinking, is this one of those areas that they're not developing very well because they're not watching it getting practiced here with me? And so we might need to do some work in our own lives in that arena. But if we are intentional about these characteristics that we want to see our children develop, then we have to accept the reality that just like going from raw ingredients to finished chocolate chip cookie, or going from weak muscles to a well-toned body is going to take energy. It's going to take some heat. It's going to take some resistance. It's going to take some friction to make all of that happen. But the end result is totally worth it. I want to encourage you today, moms and dads, that as you are in this work of this hard work of raising a child or children, or maybe you're not a parent, you're a caregiver, you're a family member, you're a mentor, but you are invested in some way in the upcoming generations, then know this, that it is worth your energy and your heat and friction and all of that stuff in order to help other people develop the characteristics that they need in order to fulfill this first great commandment: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Hey, remember this, my friend. You have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website stephaniepresents.com and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.